All right, so we're going to get started today with our next phase, and this is kind of a fun jump for you guys. And so it's the first time in class that we're going to depart from a fully scripted set of instructions. It's like, hey, you're building this exact thing, and therefore it's going to turn out this way. And I do this, and we kind of branch out in this because at some point you have to transition from just following a set of instructions to figuring out what's the best strategy. How would I make this particular object? So today we're going to actually build something that's call them building components. The idea is that you're going to build something that exists, so you're not designing it from scratch. You're going to build, say, a window, a door, something that would exist in the real you could go out and buy, but you want to be able to create some kind of a shape that you could then render that mimics that. It doesn't have to be perfectly accurate. At the same time, the goal is to be fairly accurate to what it is that we're trying to create. I'm going to use
your microphone's going out again.
Is my microphone dying on me?
Yeah.
I don't get it. I had trouble with it earlier today.
Yeah, I didn't hear it earlier, but I hear it right now.
I'm gonna move my thing over here. Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah, much better.
Okay, thank you for telling me. The worst thing I can do is just go on and not have you guys hear me at all. Okay, so we'll try it again. I move things around. Hopefully I'm getting better reception now. So basically we're gonna try to go from an existing object. And what I'm going to use as my demonstration today is a door or a window. And then I'll kind of walk through how I would go about working through this process. It doesn't mean that you have to follow the exact set of steps that I'm going to be doing. What it means is this is how I would go about it. You think about what would be the appropriate set of steps for you to go through. So I'm going to start first by finding an object. So the easy way of doing this would be to go to one of the manufacturer's websites. So let's say that I was interested in, I don't know, a Anderson window. I could look up Anderson window, and I would get to, I want to make sure that I get to their actual website, not somebody trying to sell me something. And when you look at one of these manufacturers' websites, there's usually some place where you can get to like be a contractor or get more information. And so in this website, it's listed as for pros. So we'll click on that. Other websites, let me see, Geldwin or Pella would have something similar. So I could go into Pella here, and the websites are always slightly different. But what we're looking for, let's see here, for pros, look at that. And you would go in there. We're looking for something like that because when we get in there, we can find something linked for architectural files, CAD, BIM, etc. And so all of these manufacturers provide that. And we're sticking with a fairly rectilinear object. That's why I'm suggesting doors or windows. But even websites like Kohler, if I can type here. Kohler does plumbing products and what have you. If you went into their bathroom listings, and we looked at toilets, for example, and we picked a toilet. So let's say I like this toilet. Once we get into the toilet page here, they should, down here, under specification, oh, look at that, design files. In this world, we have 2D design files, but they also have 3D design files. So an OBJ would be importable to Rhino. So that one's pretty easy because you can just download it. And the truth be told, I wouldn't want you yet modeling something that's that curving in shape. So I'd rather have you stick with something straight. But I point this out because if you want these kinds of objects, it's pretty easy long term to go find that particular product and then bring it in. Most manufacturers actually provide this information to you for free. So we're on the Anderson window page here. And what I need to do is I need to find what type of window do I want to actually create. And so they have a whole variety of different windows that are all listed depending on what, size or height, etc. So let's say that I just wanted a standard casement window. That's one that cranks out. And if I wanted a standard casement window, I could come over here and I could look at, did my mouse die? Oh, don't tell me my mouse died. No, there it is. I could come over here and I could look at, okay, you know what? The 2D elevation is really ideal for me. I don't have a 3D version. I'm not working in Revit. We're just working in Rhino. So I'm going to use the 2D DWG file. So I'll click on that and it'll download that DWG file into my downloads folder. Now, if I come back to Rhino, I need to set up my units to be correct. Right now they're in millimeters. So let me right click and go to unit settings and change into inches. And we'll say okay. And then I can go to File and then Import. Now it's not Insert. We've done Insert before. We did that last class. This is actually importing. We can go to my downloads, and there's that Anderson casement window series. We'll bring in all the rest of that, and we'll say okay. And it's going to show up here. Now when it shows up, you're going to see that I'll get a giant table. Let me make the perspective view big here. Let me zoom selected so I can orbit here. We're going to get a table of all kinds of windows that they make, some of which have divided lights on them, etc. We have, smaller windows, we have larger windows. So most of this information is not really relevant to what I'm trying to create. I want to create one specific window. So let's say that I come down here and I really like, let's see, sure, let's do a 3060. So it would be this window. I'm going to select that window and all its information, and I'm going to copy it. So I'll type copy. Let me turn on my endpoint snap here. And I'm going to move that over to the origin. So I can type in 0, 0 and hit enter. Now I have that little window that I'm going to model over here, and all the rest of this information is extra. So I can select all of it, and then I can type delete or press the delete key on my keyboard. I got a few other pieces here. And so let's look at this remaining piece. Let's zoom selected. And there is that preliminary window that I'm going to start to create. Now, I'm encouraging you to go from a set of drawings. I don't need the text here either, just because it gives us some guidelines. Now, could you actually build this completely from scratch? Absolutely. But if we have some guidelines, we have some basics of this, we can actually create this a little bit easier because we have a size and we know what it should look like. So in this scenario, we kind of have an inner and an outer frame. We've got this between here and here would be the part of the window that moves. And then from there to that line, that's kind of the outer frame of the window. And this hopefully will cause you to want to go outside and look at the windows on your house and pay a little more attention to what these windows and how they're made up. We could get real sophisticated. We could come back and we could get the 2D detail file, this one, and we could get the full profile of exactly what it looked like. This is way above what you need to do for this class, but these sample files here would give us cross sections of exactly how the window's made up. We're going to kind of wing it a little bit when we make it because we're just looking for something that'll render out nicely. So I don't need the swing mark. So that's a symbol that tells me what the swing is, so we'll get rid of that. And what I have left is I have the frame, and then I have the dividing lights. So these lines divide up the glass and make it little panes. That's the prairie style for them. And that might be something that's optional. I'll show you how to create them anyway. So let's go ahead and take all of these lines and let's put them on their own layer. Let's go over to our layers, and you can see that AutoCAD, in all its wisdom, gave us a bunch of extra layers that we really don't need. So let's create a new layer. Let's call this window lines. And then I'll right click on that new layer and say change object layer. All of these objects are now on that window lines layer, and that will let me go through and delete all the rest of these layers here that just don't matter anymore. Okay, so that error does happen sometimes when you bring in an AutoCAD file, and that's because there are some blocks that were in the AutoCAD file. So to get rid of those, we're going to go to Edit and then Blocks, and we're going to go to Block Manager. And all of these are AutoCAD garbage, so to speak. So I can select all of those. You can see Anderson window logo, like there's a bunch of things that just don't matter. So let's go ahead and delete all of those blocks. We can say, okay. They also are hidden blocks. So we could select all of the hidden ones by checking that box. Give Rhino a little bit of time to recover here. And I can select all of these. We'll select the first one, we'll scroll all the way down, select the last one. I'm holding down Shift, and then we'll press Delete. And it's working on it. There we go. This is the last one. Let's see if we can delete it now. Yep, there we go. And now all of those are gone, which will then let me delete the rest of these layers like that. So that's just, unfortunately, an artifact of the AutoCAD file that came in. If you don't clean them up, it's not the end of the world. We can still work with the file. So let's start thinking about our 3D. I'm going to create a new layer here for 3D, or maybe window. And let's do a 3.0 by 6.0. And I'll make that layer active. And so that's going to be my 3D part of this. So if I were making this, and again, it's going to be up to you because that's all the whole purpose of today, I would start by just creating a rectangular plane that's as big as the window to start. And if I were to switch my view from wireframe into shaded mode, we could kind of see that rectangular frame right there. So with that rectangular frame showing, I'm going to use a command called split. So I can type in split, or I can go to edit and then choose split. And when I do that, it says, what objects do I want to split? Well, I want to split this surface. I'll hit enter. And what are my cutting objects? What do I want to cut with? Well, I want to cut with this object. I want to cut with that object. And that's it. I'll go ahead and hit enter. And now that big surface that I have is now broken into 3 different pieces. So I have the frame that goes all the way around the outside. I have the inner frame of the window, and I have the glass. So I took that one big piece and I broke it into smaller pieces to get started. Well, now I could take, say, this piece and I could extrude it to give it some thickness. So let me go to surface, and I'm going to extrude, sorry, it's under solid, extrude surface straight. I could also type in extrude SRF to get started. I want my object to be solid, so we're going to look up here and make sure that solid is set to yes. There's also an option right here for delete input, and its default is no. Well, in this case, I don't need my original surface anymore. I just need the 3D object, so I'm going to change delete input to yes. So it's going to get rid of that original surface and replace it with this new surface. And now I need to go ahead and decide how far I'm extruding this. So let's go ahead and extrude that maybe 2 inches. So you can see I now created basically a frame. Let's take this piece and do the same thing. I'll go up to solid and I'll extrude surface straight. And now this time, I really would like it to be thicker. And I think maybe it would be helpful if it went both up and down at the same time. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on both sides. And that means it's extruding both directions from the middle. I will once again make sure delete input is set to yes, and that solid is also set to yes. And now I would like this to be the thickness of my wall. So let's say that my wall is, well, let's just use round numbers, 6 inches. If that was the case, then I would make this frame 3 inches. So my extrusion distance would be 3 inches, and it would overall make this 6 inches thick. So I have my window frame. I have my, I guess this would be the window frame. Then I have my jambs. And then I have this piece of glass in here. Well, the piece of glass currently isn't in the middle of the window. It's on the back side. So let's move that piece of glass so that it's up in the middle of the window. So I'd go to my move tool. So I go to transform and then move. In this case, I want to move vertically. and I'm going to move it from there up to the midpoint. Now I'm not snapping to the midpoint because I don't have it turned on. So let me turn on my midpoint. And there I'm snapped to the midpoint. So right now this piece of glass is only one thickness. Glass, when it's rendered in Rhino, really needs to, or excuse me, when it's rendered in V-Ray, really needs to have some thickness to it. So I'd like that to be about a 1/2 inch. So I'll use my extrude again. So I'm going to go to solid, extrude surface, straight. And I'm once again going to set it for both. I'm going to make sure it's solid, and I'm going to delete the input. And my distance here is only going to be 1/4 inch because I want the overall thickness to be a 1/2 inch. So I'm going to type in 0.25 inches. And that then gives me the resulting piece of glass right there. So now we can start to work on kind of embellishing this a little bit more. So what if, for example, we wanted to chamfer the edges of this or round the edges of this frame? Well, I can do that using a fillet surface or a chamfer surface. We did that using in the exercise where we built that bridge module. So I could type in chamfer SRF for chamfer surface. And we could say my distance, definitely not 1 by 1. It might be like an 8. So we'll say 0.125 by 0.125. And I could then chamfer this edge to that edge. Now we've got some issues, and we had these same kinds of issues occur back when we did our bridge. See how that chamfer went beyond my shape? It's a perfect opportunity. Let me press Control Z to undo, to actually split this surface first into separate pieces. So I could draw a line at the corner there. I could draw another line down here at the corner. And if I want to split this, I have some complicating factors here. This is currently a solid, so it goes all the way around. If I'm splitting just the top surface, then I need to explode the solid first. If I'm splitting the whole 3D object, then this line is not nearly thick enough. I need to make sure that it's actually a plane that goes through my objects. So there's really two options here. I'll show you both methods just so you can see it. Let me make a copy of this whole window. So you can see both methods here. So the first method would be to take this solid and explode it, which means the top surface is separate from the other surfaces. And then I could split it, if I can type split here, with those two diagonal curves that I just created. There and there. I'll hit enter. This is now separate. And if I did a chamfer, this edge to that edge, I get a nice result. So I would then need to split the other corners. So let's do this from there to there. From there to there. We'll take that surface again. Oops. There we go. Split. My cutting objects are those two diagonals. And then I could once again chamfer the surface. There. There. And like that. So that was a little bit more work because I had to split that top piece, but the end result turned out pretty nice. The complication here is if I wanted to do it again on the bottom, I'd have to do the same process. So I'd flip my object over, draw those lines again. The alternative method would be instead to create a vertical plane out of this line. So let me zoom selected just so we can see it here. And then I can create a vertical plane out of that line. So I could extrude it. This is extrude curve. We're not making a solid, and we just need it to be tall enough. Or actually, I could go down. It's probably better if I go down. And I could snap, or I could just leave it long. And now when I select that extrusion, I can use that as a split. So let me do one more over here, and I'll do it quicker by using the mirror command. There. Let's take both of those and let's mirror those this way. Okay, so now I have all of those diagonals. I can select my 3D object. I can type split, and my cutting objects are going to be all 4 of those extrusions. 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'll press enter, and hopefully I end up with 3D objects now that have been split. See how those are different? That saves me from exploding them, but it will let me do the same chamfer. So I can get rid of my little splits. Let me select those. I'll press delete on the keyboard. So now if I came in here to do the chamfer surface, I can chamfer those like that. Same thing there. But I can come down and I could do the bottom because I was able to trim those as objects, as solids, rather than as individual surfaces. So it's a little bit less work if you conceive of it that way. But I wanted to at least point it out that there's 2 methods. And that's really what this exercise is about, is that there are lots of different ways of achieving the same thing. So I've managed to do the chamfer on this. Maybe I want to add some mullions on the window. So maybe it's something like this. Now, maybe I don't want the profile of this mullion to be rectilinear. Maybe I want it to be curving. So I could establish the profile and then do a sweep on that profile to actually create the shape. So let's take all of those lines, and I'm going to move them up just to make them a little bit easier to see. All right, I'm going to move them, V for vertical. And so I'll bring them straight up until they line up with this surface right there. So just sitting on top. Just makes it easier for you guys to see it. Now I need whatever the profile of this curve would be. Did I move it too high? I think I did. There it is. Sorry, that was too high. Okay, so now, like I said, I need the profile of this edge. So I could draw it, right? I can use, let's say, this tool here to draw the profile. And I'm going to exaggerate this a little bit because I want to kind of show you what you can do. So let's say that we draw this. And that's the profile. Not that that would be like that in real life, but let's say it is. I have that curve. I'm going to do a rotate 3D on it. 3D. There we go. Rotate 3D. Can't type. My base is going to be here. My axis of rotation is going to go out there, and I would fold that up into place. And then I can do a sweep of this. So I'd take and do a sweep 1. That would be my rail. That would be my cross-section curve. And say, okay. And that then builds that line. So it really has a lot of flexibility. It could be anything that I wanted it to be. I can then take this same piece, or better yet, the same curve. We could copy it. Put it there. I can take that curve. Oops, I'm not going to see it. So let me switch over into my ghosted mode. That'll let me see it. Rotate. That's a regular rotate this time because I'm just rotating 90 degrees. And then we're going to do a sweep 1. Rail. Cross-section curve. And that then builds that part of it out. So I'm using this as kind of a silly example. Obviously, this profile is really weird, but the point is that you can do that as you start to create it. I'm going to just delete these because I don't think they're really relevant at this point. And maybe I end up just doing a basic box to make the mullions if I wanted to at all. So I could say there's my box, and we'll go down 0.75 inches. And then I'm going to take this box that I just made, and let's move it vertically by 0.125 inches. And theoretically, oops, never mind, because I went up instead of down. Let's move it vertically -5/8. There we go. And that just means that it's sticking out of the glass a little bit there. And on the back side, it's sticking out of the glass the same amount. So we could take that little extrusion, we could copy it. I don't need to trim it out. It's going to be just fine when I go to do the renderings. I'm going to do it like that. Let me quickly do this piece. So same thing, it was 3/4, 0.75. And we move it vertically 5/8. And I'm typing in here -5/8 so that it knows that it's going down. And then I'll go ahead and copy it. To that point right there. Looks like it might be a little bit higher. Anyway, so the point is that we've created those objects. Let me go to my shaded mode, and you can see it now. And so now I need to actually stand this up in 3 dimensions. So I can take this whole object, and I can use my rotate 3D. So I'm going to go to my transform, rotate 3D. We'll pick the bottom of this object there. I'm going to hold down Shift to make sure that it's 90 degrees, or I could turn on ortho. And that's now my window. For clarity purposes, let me delete this one. Let's move this window right to the origin. So I'll type in move. We'll go from this point to 0, 0, 0. And so now we need to spend some time organizing this object. So let's create some sublayers. So over in my layer stack, I'll create a sublayer for frame. Maybe a sublayer for jam. Maybe a sublayer for glass. And then I'll move these objects. So this was glass. So we'll change object layer. These pieces were my frame. Oops, and it looks like I have to select the little bevels too. Well, I'll tell you what, we'll select those after we select the, so this one was my jam. So let's right click and say change object layer. We'll turn off the curves. We'll turn off the frame, we'll turn off the glass and the jamb, and what's left is the mullions and the frame. So I can take all of these and put those on the frame layer. I could also create a new sublayer for mullions if I wanted to. And I could select, oops, the mullions and put them on their own layer. So you see how I'm changing all of these objects onto different layers so that it's much easier to apply materials to these layers. So let's work on our materials. So this is bringing everything around full circle. Actually, I should download the materials first. So let me go to V-Ray. Hope it's not my default renderer. Let me change that. Let's go up to render, current renderer, V-Ray for Rhino. I'll open the V-Ray asset editor. Maybe. There we go. And let me start downloading these materials. So we'll go over to materials. And we'll click download. So we'll let that work. While it's downloading, I'm going to come back to my object here and look at it a little bit more. One of my options is also to add a trim around the window if I wanted to. So I could do exterior trim using the box tool. And one of the strategies that I typically use is I create a box, and even if it's not the right size, so that, like, this is not the right size for trim, it's way too big. But once I've created the box, I can use the scale command. So let me go up to transform. There are several different scale options. The scale 1D changes the shape in only one direction at a time. And I really like this. It's kind of like stretching an object in AutoCAD. So if I choose scale 1D on this object, for example, I could say, you know, the thickness of this, I really only want that to be 1.5 inches, and it'll change. I can repeat the scale 1D. There's my object again. And I really only want the height of this object to be, I don't know, 5.5. And sometimes that can make a big difference. It makes life a little bit easier to just scale the objects. So I can do the same thing. This time, let me do it down at the bottom here. Sorry, let's do a box. Put there. I'm going to use my @ sign here. So I'm going to say @ 5.5, comma, -1.5 to create that base. Oop, messed that one up. Let me come all the way up to my top of my window, and I'll snap. And then I'll come back and scale it since it didn't quite turn out the way I wanted it to. So let's take this. Let's scale 1D. And I really only wanted my thickness at 1.5 inches. Now it's down to 1.5 inches. So I have that piece of trim. Let me copy this piece. Actually, I'm going to mirror it across right there. That creates that side of the trim. And then I can create the top trim. So we can go all the way across the top. And that would be 5.5 inches. And so these objects would all be trim. So I'd create a new sublayer here for trim, or maybe exterior trim. And then I could right click and say change object layer. Sorry. There it is. And now that's exterior trim. So I'm working in creating these progressive levels of detail as I start to create these objects. I could create interior trim. So I've got all these kind of chewing on it. In the meantime, let's see if my V-Ray has finished downloading. Yep, it's downloaded everything. So now it's a matter of deciding what material do I want this to be made out of. So maybe I want it to be like a white clad exterior, in which case maybe I'd come into, well, they have wall paint, but that might be shiny enough. I could use, let's see if we have, how about plastic? Let's use plastic. And I'm looking at what options we have. Let's try this simple grain gray. Let me right click and say add to scene. And then I'll right click on it and say apply to layer. And I'm going to put it on the frame of the window. Now I might find that I don't really like the preview of this gray. It's too gray there. But remember, over here in the color, we talked about this before, I could change the color of this. So I could say, you know, I want it to be much lighter. I want it to be white. So I could change the color to white, and lo and behold, the plastic changes to white. So let me change that, the name, just so I know that it's different, and we'll call it white. Except I can't type white. Okay, so I have it set that way. This might also need to be on the little mullions. So let's right click and say apply to layer, and we'll put it on the mullions as well. There we go. So now it's there. Because this is kind of a white plastic, there's not a whole lot I need to do in terms of texture mapping. So we can skip the texture mapping for now. Let's go to glass. And I think the glass, I'm trying to remember which one. I think tempered turned out good last time. So let me go ahead and right click and say add to scene. And then I can right click on the tempered glass and say apply to layer, and we'll choose the glass. So right now I have the glass showing, and if I switch this over into my rendered mode, we'd see that. I have glass, I have a white frame, I have this jam that still needs a material. So maybe that's white too. So let's right click here and say apply to layer, and we'll put that on the jam. But maybe I want actual wood trim. So let's look at our wood. So we can look through our wood here. Obviously the flooring is probably not what I'm after. Maybe one of the veneers. So let's try this one. I'm going to right click and say add to scene. And then I'll right click and I'll apply it to my exterior trim layer. And it's done such a great job of previewing. There it is. So the wood is obviously going to have some texture mapping on it for it to look right. So let's take, I don't know, let's do this side one first. So I'll select the side. I'll come over into my properties and I'll go to texture mapping. This is just like we did last class. It's close to a box in shape, so I'll pick box map. We're going to come up here. We're going to choose a bounding box, and we're going to use the world coordinate system. And it doesn't matter because we're not capping it. So we can say yes, but it really doesn't matter. And we have our first little bit of wood. Let's change this to be x equals y equals z. And there we go. Now we're seeing the texture a little bit better. It looks like the grain is about the right scale for the size of the window that we're doing. So I'm reasonably happy. We could continue to tweak it if necessary. Let's copy this one over to here. So I'll select this object and choose my match mapping, the little brush, and we'll match this one. And it will then copy the texture over to here. Now, on this one up here, if I were to match the mapping to say this, it's going to look a little funny because the grain's going the wrong direction. We want the grain to be going 90 degrees. So let's go ahead and rotate that. We can either use our UVW rotation here to change it, or what I find a lot easier is to show the mapping widget. There's that cube that shows up, and we can then use the gumball to rotate it 90 degrees so that it's going across the window. So I have the texture applied nicely there. Let's do the same down below. And again, I can copy it. So let's hide the mapping. We'll take this object. We'll match it to that. And now I have the texture applied to that object down there as well. Okay, so what I want you to do for today is to actually go through and assign all the materials and get your object set up like this. We'll go ahead and save it now. So I'll go to File and then Save. I probably should have saved it earlier. Let me go into my OneDrive. Let's go into today's folder. All right, and I'm going to save this as Anderson 3-0 by 6-0 window. And the hope here is that I'd be able to use this down the road. So if I do a good job, then when I'm building something and I need a window, I can just come and grab the window and use it. So let's go ahead and save it. Good. And while it's finishing saving, the last piece to the puzzle here is that I need that sample file that we used last class. So let's go find that. I had it saved, and we may need to re-download it. That's always possible. Let me go here. And it was the base file for rendering with Sky. You could download it again if you wanted to. And I'm opening it this way so that I don't open it in the existing Rhino that I have open. All right, so this scene is already kind of set up for me, but I don't want to render out those windows. Oops, let's stick it right there. So let me get rid of all these pieces that I didn't need. So the quickest way of doing it is to type SEL block instance, but I can also just select them all and then press the delete key and they're gone. Now let's bring in that window that I just created. So again, the reason that I'm doing this is because this scene already has the lighting set up for me. So let's go to Edit, Blocks, Insert Block Instance. Remember, that's different from importing. I'm going to browse for that window file that I just created. There it is. I'll click on Open. We're going to link the file as a reference layer. And we'll drop that in at 0,0,0. And there's my window. I do need to move this up a little bit. So let me type move, V for vertical. And I'm going to move it up just a little bit because the trim was down below the window. Let me type Z for zoom, S for selected, so I can zoom in on this. And really, I should probably hide the gumball. All right. So now I can click on the teapot and we can actually render this to see if it turns out. So it's going to continue to improve the quality, but yeah, this did turn out as a window. And so this is what I'm after at the end of class today, or at the end of the lab today, is I want you to have created something like this, a window, a door, something with some level of detail, but I want you to come up with the steps that you would go through. So what I just went through is a sample, but it's not the exact set of steps that you necessarily need to create. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this rendering. We don't need it to finish, but I will also point out that sometimes you want a window. Let me come back to the window here. Oh, come on. Sometimes you want a window that's open. So I could select my frame, go to select objects. So I right click on the layer and choose select objects. Let me come to my mullions. I'm going to right click and say select objects. So it's going to select the frame and the mullions. And then maybe I want to rotate this. So we could pick, one side or the other. Let's say it's this one. And we could say, let's open this window a little bit. Maybe it's about like that. Then when I save it, remember when I go back to here, I can go up to my edit, blocks, block manager. That linked file is now newer. Let's update it. And it's going to show it with the window open this time. And then we could render it again. Oh, I forgot the glass. You go back and fix that. Select the glass. Rotate. 15 degrees. There we go. Let's save it. We'll go back to here. We'll go to edit, blocks, block manager. We need to update that one more time. And this time it's open. And so if we went to do the render, we'd have an updated one where the window is slightly open, which sometimes can be desired. So I'm going to go ahead and let you guys get started working. This is our goal today, window or a door. You could pick another object, but I'd really like you to focus on this. But again, this is about you creating the steps rather than necessarily following exactly what I did. What I did is a mere suggestion of what you can do. A couple other announcements before you guys leave. Next Monday is a holiday for President's Weekend, so we won't have class. We also won't have our check-in times on Monday. And because we don't have our check-in times on Monday, the students that were supposed to have their check-in times are more than welcome to come join another section on Wednesday, but you won't be docked points if you don't come on Wednesday. So your time's a holiday, you can get out of showing up next week altogether, but you're more than welcome to come to one of the sessions on Wednesday of next week. The other thing that I'll tell you guys in advance, the following Monday, so next Monday is a holiday, then we have class on Wednesday. The following Monday, I'll be out of town. So we won't have class or check-in. There won't be a live lecture and there won't be any check-ins on that day either. And then we'll get back to our regular schedule at that point. So I just want to make sure that you guys heard that and that you're aware that that's what's coming. Before I let you go, does anybody have any questions?
I just have a question. Does that mean we're going to have 2 exercises still next week and the week after, or are we just going to have 1?
Next week, you will for sure only have 1.
Okay.
The following week, I'm still kind of deciding. I think you're going to only have 1 because I don't want you, I have to look at exactly what we're doing. But if I remember my days correctly, I really want to do it live in front of you rather than just give it to you as a recording, because I think there'll be questions on what I'm going to cover. So we'll just say right now that there won't be. There will only be 1 exercise next week and 1 exercise the week after.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. Any other questions?
I had 2 questions.
Sure.
Are the Rhino templates on Canvas or are they on the Digital Tools for Designers website?
They should be on both, but
Okay.
I know they've been posted on Canvas. If you look at the Canvas, and of course I don't have it up right now. If you look at the exercise, they should be linked right there. I had a couple students who had trouble downloading them. Right click on it and say save link as when you're trying to save it, as opposed to just clicking on the link. But the sample file should be there. The other thing that I'll mention, Brooke, is that the one with the sky tends to work a little bit better. So I would, if I were picking, and you can use that one for the ones we're doing today, for what we did last class, but also for your assignment, your 201, when you start working on your table and chair, that'll be there as well. And I would go ahead and use that as a sample environment.
And is that template a couple exercises back, or is it?
It's linked in today's. It was
Today's,
also linked.
okay.
It was linked in 207. It's linked in 208.
Okay. And my other question is, for when we're picking our object for today's exercise, should it be like a fairly like linear object? Like we couldn't do something like a chair or something like that. It'd have to be like a door or a window. Or
I would, for today's purposes, I would prefer that you work more standard, where it's like a rectilinear, like a door or a window, because you're branching off for the first time. And what I don't want you to do is pick an object that's hard and then get stuck.
Okay.
I'd rather have you pick something that's like, okay, I can kind of work with this. I can figure out how I should make it. Next class, so this is not on Monday because that's a holiday, but next Wednesday, we'll start doing more organic shapes. Like we'll do pillows and curtains and that kind of stuff. And I'll walk you through that strategy. So it's coming. You'll get to do organic shapes. I know everybody wants that right away, but stick kind of rectilinear for right now.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.